Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our second of 10 programs on the matter of peace in our time. Today, we're going to be dealing with the theme of governance and law and policy in relationship to peace. And so as we begin, I want to continue the dialectic that we started yesterday, knowing that this is a program on peace. In my opening remarks, I'll be talking about the dangers that are confronting us and the reason why we urgently need peace. And I'd like to continue the theme that I began with, which in my view, and the view of a number of people, is the single greatest urgency and threat to peace currently in the world today, and that's the escalating danger of nuclear war. And the way I would like to approach this is through the prism of governance. One of the reasons why we are in the danger that we're in is because over the last 20, 25 years, the United States has abrogated and or withdrawn from all the nuclear treaties that were designed and laboriously negotiated, starting with President Kennedy in 1963 with the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, with Nixon and Brezhnev and Johnson and Brezhnev and all the negotiations between Reagan and Bush and Gorbachev and Yeltsin, producing the SALT treaties, the START treaties, the anti-ballistic missile treaties, the international intercontinental medium force treaties. We had protocols in place, knowing the dangers that were emanating out of our commitment to global governance and law to protect humanity from the incineration of nuclear war. Then beginning in 2001, within a few months of 9/11, President George W. Bush Jr. unilaterally declared that the United States was going to withdraw from the anti-ballistic missile treaty. That treaty that had been designed and finally negotiated with Gorbachev and his father and President Reagan to prohibit the signers, in particular the United States and Russia, from developing defense mechanism, anti-ballistic missiles, because it was understood that if you start building protective measures, it's going to increase the incentive to break through the dome. And that was something that held for many years. And then George Bush withdrew from the treaty. And then gradually the United States began to withdraw, abrogate, not renew the other treaties, culminating in 2019 with the most dangerous withdrawal of all, transacted unilaterally by President Trump, where the United States informed Russia that it was withdrawing from the intermediate nuclear test ban. And what this meant is that, in contradistinction with what was in place during the treaty, that neither the United States or Russia would put forward missile systems close to the borders of the other countries that could get to Moscow or wherever in a matter of seconds. That whole treaty was abrogated. And this is a particularly meaningful treaty to me because I was in Europe doing my graduate work, my PhD, during the early 1980s when the United States under President Reagan tried to place Pershing II and cruise missiles in Europe that would radically destabilize the nuclear deterrence. And it was Gorbachev that initiated the treaty protocol to eliminate Pershings and cruise missiles from Europe. Now they're back and placed in Germany, in Poland, in Romania, are forward stationed US nuclear weapons that can get to Moscow in less than 120 seconds. Additionally, because there's no protocols, the Biden-Harris administration last month issued what they called the Nuclear Employment Guidance Directive to the Pentagon to begin planning a first strike nuclear capacity against Russia, China, and North Korea simultaneously. And with the directive to begin to put what they call superfuses on 1,600 warheads that could be shot from Europe, could be shot from submarines, to take out with what they call 100% accuracy the ICBM silos in Russia, China, and North Korea simultaneously, followed by the intercontinental ballistic missiles of the United States to destroy command and control underground bunkers, cities across those three countries. This barely even made the news. I would bet most of you didn't even know it happened. But it did. And it's all because we've abrogated the governing mechanisms to keep the escalation toward nuclear weapons exchange in check. And I want to end with one note. Last week, when President Biden was meeting with Keir Starmer and the Ukrainians and trying to make a decision that I talked about yesterday to allow US, British, and French military forces to enter into the war in Ukraine against Russia as full combat participants. One of the journalists in the press conference afterwards said to President Biden, "Did you listen to Putin's speech a few days ago where he was warning that this would escalate toward a nuclear exchange because Russia would then be in a combat reality, not just with Ukraine, but with the United States and NATO?" And with some irritation, Biden's reply was, "I don't think about Putin. I don't care what Putin thinks." Well, Mr. President, John Kennedy cared about what Khrushchev thought. And that's why during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was in personal contact with Khrushchev. And they committed together to design the first ever nuclear treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Kennedy was followed by Nixon. and Johnson. They all cared what the Soviet and Russian leaders thought, and they had a series of summits. So did George Bush Sr. So did Ronald Reagan. But since the beginning of the expansion of NATO to the east, in violation of the agreement that the United States made with Gorbachev that it wouldn't push NATO to the east, almost no American president has had a summit with its Russian counterpart. Biden has not called Putin once during the conflict in Ukraine. So when the president of the United States says that he doesn't care what the leader of the greatest nuclear power in the world thinks and is contemplating escalating the conflict in Ukraine to a nuclear weapon status, you get some measure of the danger that we're in. And that's why Jeffrey Sachs and others are repeatedly warning all of us to take this seriously, because it's our lack of awareness and the blasé attitude with which we conduct our foreign policy in this country that actually constitutes a major part of our predicament. And as President Trump said in his last debate with Kamala Harris, it was the one point that I think we should all note. When Kamala Harris was talking about, oh, yes, we've got to support Ukraine. We've got to do everything to support Ukraine. And I was instrumental in engineering essentially the war. What did he say? We need to remember that Russia has more nuclear weapons than we do. And so when we talk about peace, we're talking about governance, and we're talking about law and policy, we need to bear in mind that at the highest levels, the kind of governance and law and policy that we need to ensure the peace have been systematically broken down by the United States of America. And there's no other way to put it. That's what's true. It's against this backdrop that we'll continue our discussion of peace in our time. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Humanity Rising as we continue as best we can to look reality squarely in the eye, both the good and the bad, so that we can evaluate what it is that we truly need to do as a people and as a global community. Never before has our Earth and the human race been on such a precarious precipice of self-destruction. It's my pleasure now to introduce my good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who will initiate our program for today. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And, you and I've had these conversations periodically where I try and build a bridge from your opening comments to the program. And there are moments, there are days when I'm at a loss, and today is one of those days. I will do my best, but I so appreciate the way you see the world, the way you think, and what's alive for you from day to day, and just really respect and honor and appreciate who you are. And I think what I will share in terms of building a bridge to our program today on governance, law, and security is that the human species is an incredibly complex species. We have the ability to commit suicide. We have the ability to commit murder. We have the ability to commit genocide. We have the ability to commit ecocide. And throughout our history as a species on planet Earth, we have done each of those over and over again. And that's part of who we are as a species. But we also have the ability to live in peaceful coexistence, which we've done through most of the last 240,000 years that the human species has been on this planet. And that contradiction makes it very challenging for each of us to understand the nature of our species, the nature of our reality, and the nature of the world. And while all of the things that Jim has shared are true, it's also very true that most of the 8 billion people living on planet Earth are living in some semblance of peace, as we talked about yesterday using the Marilyn's peace ladder. And so with those comments, I'd like to bring Marilyn into the conversation and welcome you into today's discussion, Marilyn, on governance, law, and security.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you, Tom. And Jim, I am just like so always blown away. I cannot even imagine how your brain holds all of that stuff and how your heart and your energetic system holds all of what you know. And I thought how you began was really just so pertinent for what we're doing today, because the way you began was talking about, you wanted to talk about the threat to peace. And deeply knowledgeable about that threat. And I think most of us, we're nowhere near close to as knowledgeable about the details of what you shared. But the other part of it, it's a threat to what exists. It's the threat to the peace that is. And that's why I thank you for the Humanity Rising opportunity and platform for us to talk about when peace was a secret. Because the status, the history, the existence, the underpinnings of peace. So peace literacy is something that not many people are very consciously aware of and have the kind of detailed content about peace, which is what we really value. We don't have the kind of depth of information and understanding and awareness that you brought to the threat. So thank you. And I want to remind people that part of why I get to be who I am and the perspective that I have is because I was in the Olympic Village. I was just kind of an ordinary person who was seized by a thought that I could be in the Olympics. When I walked around the Olympic Village, wide-eyed in my first team, I saw 7-foot-tall Japanese guys. And I thought, I didn't know they made 7-foot-tall Japanese people. Oh, the Northern Islands, have really tall people, in Japan. And so that's where their basketball team comes from. But my point here is, as I walked around the village and saw every race and religion and political persuasion, countries that were at war, religions that were, contradictory to each other or certainly not friendly, and yet we lived in peace. In the cafeteria, on the bus, on the playing field, and the best place was in the discotheque where you didn't have to talk. You could just dance with these great athletes. So I'm very, very privileged to have been in the Olympic Village, and then the privilege to meet and be mentored by people like, Willis Harman, who said the negative belief that peace is not possible is the greatest impediment to achieving peace. If I didn't think I could be in the Olympics, and when I didn't, I trained in a certain way. As soon as I had that idea that I could, my thoughts and behaviors changed. So Willis was referring that to peace, and that we as Olympians have a level of credibility around how you achieve things that seem unimaginable, and we have a podium in every country to speak and share with people that mindset, and that we can actually engineer at this point in time, a global mind change, so that people can see the peace that is, and that we are in a time of systemic change. And so for me, when I met with the Brahma Kumaris and found they'd created a book from a sports standpoint, if you want to achieve something as a team, you need to know what the goal is. I thought my job was to convene something global so that we could see the common goal, but they had already done that. So I'm going to just hold up for a moment. This is, I think, one of the most important books on the planet. It's called Visions of a Better World, from the Brahma Kumaris. And they went into 123 countries asking people, what's your vision of a better world? And it's divided into accumulating people's responses from military leaders to street people. You can see that while different words and different focuses, we actually do have a common goal. When we talk about peace, we have very similar understandings of what we would like to see. And then it was like, well, okay, if we've got a common goal, what are we fighting about here? And it's like, oh, we need a game plan. And that's when I was connected with Avon Madison, and instantly saw that the International Day of Peace, when we can all look in one direction, September 21st, and have that be designed as a day that can inspire, inform, and engage us all in what we need to do as our part, as part of an Olympic level peace team. And that this is a time of systemic change. So this particular programming, we are just beginning and stepping into the opportunity to create a report card. So Tom, if you would put up the peace wheel and people can see, what the 8 sectors are. I'll talk about them for just a moment. But when people talk about the shift is on, we are really shifting from poorly informed and misinformed about things we care about to being able to access information that is available to us about things we care about. So you might see this Pathways to Peace peace wheel as a game plan for peace, and that these are all special teams. So today we're going to be talking about governance and law. And the game plan going forward is for us to be part of crowdsourcing, using tools like AI, but experts like the people that we have, people with expertise in each of these areas, so that we can see both the history of good governance on the planet, the status of where it's working and where it's not, understanding what are the underpinnings when it's working, and what is the information that we have, which is extensive, about how we speed shift from not good to good governance. So I'm really excited for what we're going to be doing today. And what I would like to do to begin, just before I introduce my guests, is I am now going to hold up and use what I'm sharing with you. If we can go back to the visual, this is something that we can make available to everyone. It's actually called the Peace Card from Pathways to Peace, and it's a goal statement in each of the 8 areas. So I shared this with the participants yesterday in a very particular way that I call the 10-day challenge, because I understand brain science and how the mind works. And my invitation yesterday was that to wake up in the morning and do what Olympians do and envision your gold, not a goal, but your gold. For me, it was walking into the Olympic Stadium. Michael Phelps, it was 8 gold medals. But for those of us who are focused on peace, just to begin our day the Olympian way. And I encouraged people just to take 5 minutes with this set of goal statements and begin with imagine a world in these 8 statements. But I encouraged people to shift to, I wish I could live in a world that looks like each of these. And then to shift again to, I want to live in a world. I'm going to read it this morning to begin our program with where I encouraged people to shift once more. So I'd like to ask everyone just to take a nice deep breath in and just go with me and feel what it feels like to breathe in this vision of peace and where I'm sharing it from. So instead of imagine a world, I want to share with you that I intend to live in a world where governments respect the human rights of all their citizens and settle disputes by the rule of law for the common good. I intend to live in a world where all people have food, shelter, and access to medical care, and children are born into and raised by healthy families and communities. I intend to live in a world where literacy and education for all are accomplished facts. I intend to live in a world where economic practices create well-being for all stakeholders, including communities and the environment. I intend to live in a world where beauty, the arts, and media inspire the best in people. And I intend to live in a world where the benefits of science and technology enhance all circles of life. And I intend to live in a world where tolerance and appreciation of diverse religious beliefs is the rule. Spiritual practice is encouraged and reverence for life is fostered. And finally, I intend to live in a world where the earth in all her natural beauty is treasured and her resources utilized sustainably for this and future generations. This is a world at peace. Makes me emotional. I intend that we can share from the sense of peace literacy so people can see where all of this already exists, and they can see who's doing what to upshift and to up the game of all of us in any of these areas that's important. So as we begin today, I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing our guest, because while it can seem overwhelming, most of us who've been involved in these kinds of things, we can't really work harder, we can only work smarter. So we are really looking at providing information such that we can provide a report card that has people easily step into systemic change in any or all of these areas. So it really is my extreme pleasure this morning to introduce two people who I am just delighted to share with you. Carlos Mota and I were both privileged to have been invited by Willis Harman and Avon Madison to a 5-year think tank called PB21, hosted by the Fetzer Institute. We met twice a year for 5 years in dialogue. And these were all people who were like ahead of the pioneers in anything from the monetary system to you name it. So Carlos and I became friends, haven't been connected for quite some time, but I thought of him and wanted to bring him into this program. I really encourage you to read his bio. That's part of the description. I cannot even begin to share with you how appropriate, given the skill sets that he brings about systemic change and the breadth of experience he has working with groups and also at the international level. So I encourage you to read his bio there. And I'm also get to share with you a newer friend of mine, JC Rowe, and we met at the coffee shop, and it took time, but every time we met, I became more and more impressed and just like in love with this guy. He has chops from the street level to how he was groomed through his internship and relationship with people at the national and playing at the international level. So if you don't mind, I'd like to bring in our two guests. And if I would like to ask each of you to just very briefly, just say a couple of things that you would like people to know as we enter into the conversation. Carlos and JC.
Thank you, Marilyn. What a pleasure it is to be here and to share with you some of our points of view about this relevant issue of governance. I'm coming from the business side of reality. I studied in Mexico a BS in business and an MBA from Stanford University, and working several business positions up until I was general manager of a medium-sized company in Mexico, and then decided to make a change in my life because of an event that happened many years ago, being a coach, a personal coach for a political candidate that was killed in Mexico, that was assassinated during his campaign. And that changed my mind. and my life, because the vision he had for government and for Mexico, I said to myself, I want this vision for my 3 children. But he was killed, and that made me conscious about a new era that we are living in. And I started studying systems thinking. I went to one of the seminars of Margaret Whitley, and then scenario planning, and also studied the evolution of human beings from Humberto Maturana in Chile. And that gave me a larger perspective of life and about my responsibility as human being to do something about it. And I'm currently a business consultant, but also a consultant to foundations and social NGOs. And it's my complete privilege to be here spending a few minutes with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carlos. It's a delight to be with you.
Thank you.
And JC?
Thank you again, Ms. King, Tom, George, everybody at Humanity Rising for having me with you all today. It's truly an honor to be here. I am JC Rowe IV, originally born in Detroit, Michigan. And I love how Marilyn said, I have a street level connection. I think that's part of being from Detroit. You can't help but have to connect with people on the ground, right? Like union workers, like my grandma, when I was growing up, she used to say, I put the seats into the cars in Chrysler, and I can take them out too if you act some kind of way, right? She would take my seat out of my car so I couldn't drive as a form of punishment, right? That's a different kind of threat to receive from your grandmother. But I'm used to this type of, let's just say, harder mentorship that creates a longer peace, right? My grandma wasn't a woman that played around a lot. And so I want to share that because that led me into my political science and Pan-African studies degree at the University of Louisville. It led me into working with these different state senators and the Congressional Black Caucus, where I was able to meet John Lewis. And so I want to read some quotes from John Lewis today based on the conversation that we've been having and see if we can like kind of tie it together, because I think the world we live in are living in right now is like a beautiful choir with no choir director, right? You have a bunch of amazing singers, but there's no direction. And then we're missing the band. Where's the orchestra that's actually elating the music for all of us to feel and resonate, right? So it seems like we have 1,000 people just kind of bumping heads everywhere, like protons and electrons that don't know where they're going. And so I'm going to read these quotes because we talk about governance. So one of them is from John Lewis, Walking with the Wind book. He says, rioting is not a movement. It is not an act of civil disobedience. I think it is a mistake for people to consider disorganized action, mayhem, and attacks on other people and property as an extension of any kind of movement, which I think plays into the conversation on nuclear wars earlier. He says, it is not. It is simply an explosion of emotion. That's all. There's nothing constructive about it. It is destructive. Now, imagine if this was guiding our young people over the last 20 years, right? How much more policy change we could have had with direct action as a laser focus versus the chaos that we've been all witness over the last 20 years, really, from the Occupy movement to Black Lives Matter. Where have the policies come into place that brought sustainable peace? We've had a lot of energy transpire, but we haven't seen the change. We're, as it was shared earlier, we're still at risk of nuclear warfare today more than we was during the Cold War. That's problematic, right? And so one more quote I want to read before I let you all go is by John Lewis in his March book 2. We are involved in a serious revolution. So let's think about that, right? Because every time we think about revolution, we want to think about it from guns, but revolution starts with the mind, right? It's a spiritual revolution. How do we heal? But at the same time, the spiritual, my mom would always say, don't be so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. So to have a spiritual revolution and to say, oh, I'm praying and I'm meditating for peace without the action of is no different from that choir thinking of wonderful songs individually and not coordinating together with the choir director to bring forth the music, right? We can't be spiritual by ourselves. We have to have an actual impact on the audience members, aka society, right? So he says, we are involved in a serious revolution. This nation is still a place of cheap political leaders who build their careers on immoral compromises and ally themselves with open forms of political, economic, and social exploitation. What political leader here can stand up and say, my party is the party of principles? Now, Mr. Lewis wrote this over 50 years ago, guys. But we're still asking these same questions today. So I want to leave that with you all. Again, I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Ms. King, for having me. And I'm hoping that this can be a continued effort of the actions that bring peace that we have had in America for a long time, but it's always been on the underground. And like hip hop, we need to bring peace to the forefront. Thank you guys for your time. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, JC. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Marilyn. Terrific to have the three of you here today in this particular conversation on governance law and security. And I think where I'd like to start our conversation today, building off of what each of you have brought into the opening remarks along with Jim's comments, is that what I've observed over the last, I'll call it 30 years. It certainly has a longer history than that, but especially in the last 30 years, and especially here in the US, what we've seen is a steady transition from our elected leaders, our government officials running the agenda of the world, to business leaders running the agenda of the world. And we've got business leaders who aren't trained as politicians, who aren't trained as looking at and understanding a whole systems perspective. They're obviously very smart, capable people, but their background, their experience, their training is in the industry that they work in and in the private sector. And they don't fully understand the contradictions, the complexity of what it means to be human, what it means to be holding governance responsibilities. And yet they're driving that agenda at the direction of their shareholders. And so we've got a stakeholder in this species we call humanity that is running the world without being fully educated, informed, and prepared. And I'd love to start the conversation there. And maybe, Carlos, with your background in business, maybe you'd like to share your thoughts first.
Thank you, Tom, for your comment, which I agree completely. Actually, Willis Harman, our common friend with Marilyn, said that business is the most powerful institution nowadays. And I fully agree with it. I believe, I sometimes say, joking, that I'm coming from the business world and I'm healing. And I'm healing myself. And I'm in that process. And I fully believe that because what I lived inside businesses and observing businesses and working with businesses is that there is a selfish position in this capitalist world. And I believe that's one of the sources of many of our problems, to be selfish, to be centered in our ego, and just looking for larger income, accumulation of things, and disregarding what is the price that we're paying for that. And we're paying a very high price that is threatening life at its core. So I believe that it's time for business leaders to become conscious, to move from ego to higher self, and to connect there. Because business is not, as Milton Friedman said, he said, the business of business is business. And I don't agree with it. The business of business is life. And then how can a business contribute to the benefit of many people, but preserving life in the planet, animals, plants, and human beings? So there's a huge responsibility in businesses in fostering a world that is more equitable, more just for everyone. I believe that we're now moving into uncharted waters as humanity. And the pandemic seemed to be a turning point in my view. After the pandemic, these uncharted waters, we need to realize that we need a different way to understand life, a different way to see ourselves, and to understand, as Jim pointed out so clearly, that we're at the brink of many threats hitting us. I live in Mexico City, a country that has moving backwards in terms of democracy. At this day that I'm talking, the current government is taking over the judiciary system, the legislative system, Army, Navy, and practically all institutions that were created over the 30 years past, and just taking control of that. So when I'm speaking, I see some difficult times ahead of Mexico, but I see it in other countries as well, because what we are experiencing is the systemic consequence of structures that are not working at this time. And I just referred to the pyramid of Daniel Kim that worked with Peter Senge in the fifth discipline, and this pyramid talks about events. We're in love with events, but underneath events, there are trends that sometimes we don't see. And beneath trends are systemic structures that are causing those trends and those events. But underneath everything is mental models or paradigms or worldviews. We urgently need to change our worldview about life and about human beings. And I believe that that needs to be considered very seriously by individuals, but also by institutions, business, and governments. And I think that I cannot change the world, but I can change my world. And I can do something here where I live with my neighbors and with my relationships. And we need to evolve as citizens, as politicians, as business leaders, as human beings. We really need to move to transcend our ego and be centered at our higher self and act from that position. It's no longer useful to just look for myself and my privileges and my accumulation of things. This is a time to be in solidarity with people that within this system have been neglected possibilities of a better life. So we're in debt to many people in the world. And I believe that we have all the conditions that are necessary to do that. Yes, Marilyn.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can circle back, Carlos, because I want to hear from JC, and I hope we can circle back because you have a perspective in both business and government at very high and intimate levels, and as does Tom. I hope we can circle back because we know that underneath both of the business and governance systems are people. And many of us who don't have access think certain things about these people. But I know Tom's experience coaching at a very high level with CEOs is in touch with CEOs who are actually exhibiting and working in broken systems that make it difficult for them to bring their humanity to the board meeting and to the bottom line. And the same thing with broken systems in governance. So I hope that we could circle back with you, Carlos, after we continue for a moment, because I'd like to just hear from you about any experience you have or any perspective you have on things that you are aware of in terms of who the people are who are working within these broken systems, but yet exhibit the kinds of humanity that we know is important to help shift the system. But please, JC, love to hear from you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Carlos. You were reminding me of the Michael Jackson song, I'm looking at the man in the mirror, when you were talking, right? We have to reflect on ourselves. And so that's what I was thinking about. But I'm also, I've always been curious about this since I was a young man, about who's lobbying for peace, right? And it almost sounds like a weird phrase, because when you hear lobbying, you think of the capitalistic nature and structure of manipulating governments. But lobbying for peace is lobbying for humanity. And I was always wondering, I'm like, Lockheed Martin has lobbyists, Boeing has lobbyists, right? All of the warmongers have lobbyists. Who's lobbying for peace, right? What corporations, what corporate structure exists in our country that is financing lobbyists for peace, that's financing lobbyists to protect our children's education and future, right? When I think about going back to my mentor, John Lewis, what makes him such a standout guy for me is a couple of things. First, he didn't die during the civil rights movement, right? Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Malcolm X, they all died. We don't get to see how their lives would have played out. John Lewis was still alive up until just a few years ago. So he showed us that a revolutionary has to be involved on one way or another in the government infrastructure. And being in that government infrastructure as a congressman out of Atlanta, he was one of the few people that lobbied for peace, that lobbied for humanity, that lobbied for the children, right? Part of our friendship when I'm 17, 18 years old was he cared about young people and helping shape our minds for the future, so I can be a guest on the Humanity Rising panel today and continue his legacy and his words of wisdom. This matters. When we go back to the choir having a choir director, right? The children need a choir director, and the peacemakers need a choir director that's engaging our Senate, our judicial branch, and our congressional arm for peace in a real way that has a transformative, fruitful production for America. This can't be just peace in our heart, peace in our time, peace when we're singing Kumbaya, drinking coffee with one another. No, this is when we're walking down the street and we're seeing humanity struggling with the drug addictions, the mental illnesses, the homelessness. These are forms of violence, according to the World Health Organization. If we're for peace, our lobbying for peace will have, again, a fruitful transformation in all of these aspects. So by the time we get to the nuclear war, which was, I read the quote from Shannon, an explosion of emotion. Oh my God. Every time I see homeless people in the street, I think this is an explosion of somebody's emotion who's not showing that they care about our humanity. When I see the children who are shooting up the schools or shooting each other in Oakland, I say this is an explosion of emotion from the lack of direction, And so my question to the panel, to myself, to everybody listening is who is lobbying for peace and who is lobbying for the people that Ms. Marilyn spoke of earlier? Because it's so easy to see the corporations as corporate workers and the laborers as union workers and the poor as the poor. But at the end of the day, we are humanity. We are the people. And somebody has to speak for us in a real way that's not about putting something in your pocket, but making sure there's something for the children to drink of in the future. That's not poison. Thank you.
Yeah, just picking up on a couple of points that you all have raised. One of the observations I've made is that in the at least in the military and the intelligence world, they talk about we're living in a VUCA world that's volatile, uncertain, and we as a species, we've created so much complexity and uncertainty, whether we're talking climate change or otherwise, that it's a very, very scary world that we're living in, that there's so much uncertainty. And we're seeing it, whether it's in Hungary with Viktor Orban, or in Brazil with Bolsonaro's election, in the UK, or in Mexico, as Carlos was just describing, here in the US, where we're like adolescent children that have gotten themselves in so much trouble that they just go to their parents and say, I don't know how to move forward, and please solve this problem for me. And we're looking to call them strong men, who are saying, I have the answer, I will take care of it. And that's part of what we're seeing is we've created so much disturbance on the planet that we don't know how to find our way through. The other piece of it, and tying it back to the reference to the Michael Jackson song, and tying it back to industry. I was watching television last night, which I don't do very often, and an Apple commercial came on for the new Apple AI. And there were two women sitting at a table in a restaurant, and the one woman was asking the other woman, have you read the script that I sent you for my new film project? And the other woman clearly had not read the script. She hadn't even opened the email, and she quickly used her Apple AI that gave her a quick summary of the email note that came through and gave her prompts on how to answer this woman. Here's AI, here's Apple, the largest company in the world, the most financially profitable company in the world, telling their audience, we have this new technology, telling their customers, we have this new technology that enables you to lie, to be out of integrity with yourself, to be out of integrity with humanity. And the largest company in the world is promoting a piece of software on their device that says it's okay to lie. It's okay to be out of integrity. And this is a company that is manipulating and controlling what's happening in Washington, D.C. And they're not alone. I mean, all of the major influential companies are. And so I think these two forces of the private sector that isn't prepared to be running the agenda of the world, and a species that has created a situation where we've gotten ourselves in so much trouble. And so there's a hunger, there's a need, there's a necessity for good governance. There's a need, there's a necessity for rule of law. And there's a lot there that I just shared, but I'd love the three of you to continue this conversation.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let me tie us. I'd love where you went, Tom, and bringing us to what the Peace Wheel says, about governance and all of the confusion, where governments respect the human rights of all their citizens and settle disputes by the rule of for common good. There are many forms of governance, and very succinctly, I want to just suggest that people have differences of opinion about what is a kind and form of governance that can most effectively produce that kind of gold standard. And with the AI, I am a beginning engagement and dancer with it. And I was really touched with how challenged we are about the kinds of things that you identified with the Apple commercial. At the same time, looking to gather information, but know that that information is valid. I was very excited because for me, one of the frameworks that I hold as potential for delivering on the kind of governance that is described in the Peace Wheel is what's called mature democracy. And it's fully informed participatory democracy. With that just as kind of my underpinning, but knowing that not everyone would use that measure, when I used AI and started to look, I looked in all of these different, geographies, and I'll just, glance at my notes here. and that in the last 100 years, the number of democracies on the planet has gone from flat to very increased. And in Latin America, the balance is 16 democracies versus 3 that are not and under threat. In Africa, it's very different, 22 democracies and 32 that are not functioning democracies or in that domain at all. In Asia, 16 to 23. But more importantly than that, when I think about AI, I have for a couple of years now been wanting to get someone to take Gene Sharp's work, which as a researcher, he did the research on the history of successful nonviolent revolutions. How do we move from not functioning to functioning, high functioning governments? And he created a decision tree out of all of the years of work he did on successful nonviolent revolutions. And in AI, I was able to get back this short list of young people in different parts of the world who have been successful using his work. And some of the ones that were cited were in Serbia, that it was basically young people with his work who toppled Milosevic. And in 2008 in Georgia, the Rose Revolution that toppled Shevardnadze. And that early in Ukraine in 2004, the Orange Revolution, in Tunisia, the beginning of the Arab Spring, and in Egypt, in Tahrir Square, in 18 days because of what they learned from his work. So my point in bringing these statistics or these ideas forward is that we have access to information that can assist us in moving from governance systems that are broken and are dominated by business, as we've been referring, and not representing what indigenous people might call wearing the 7 generations hat is what you are doing, going to be positive for 7 generations for the children. So I would just like to, put that forth as each of you provide some remarks for us about where we are relative to our system of governance, what you see, any hopeful things that you see, because what I'm looking for out of this series is for people to be able to see the history, status, and what can we bring together that will show people who care and believe that governance is important. What can we do that we know will be part of making a difference in the systemic change? So thank you for letting me provide that for your remarks now.
If I may, one reaction, what can I do? First of all is understanding that our worldview will be the basis for what we do with so much information. I remember Einstein's quote, current problems cannot be solved at the same level of thinking that we used to have when we created those problems.
Yes.
We need to revisit that because in these uncharted waters that I talked about, I think that one of the characteristics is increasing complexity and uncertainty. And just a word, complexity is not a problem. Complexity is the nature of some systems. We need to understand that because we have to embrace complexity and uncertainty from a different level of thinking. Systems thinking could be one potential path to that. It's not the only one, it's not the unique one, but it's very, very relevant to have a systemic understanding of things and it's the unwanted consequences of our actions.
Yes.
We're responsible for our actions and for the impact of our actions, not just for our actions. We need to look forward and to. So what I think, responding to your comment, Marlene, is that we really have many things to do. One is to be good citizens and to evolve as citizens, to speak our voice, as JC was mentioning. We are responsible as individuals. And just think of this quote of Mother Teresa. I'm only a drop of water in the ocean, but without me, the ocean would be different. We need to understand and believe that I'm only one person among 8 billion people in the planet, but I can make a change in where I live, with the people I talk, with my relations, and with my life.
Yes.
So I have power to do that.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah, maybe picking up on that just for a second and going back to both comments made by JC and by Marilyn. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been quoted as saying the next Dalai Lama will be the Sangha. It will be the community.
Yes.
And JC, you were talking about, you know, the need for the choir director. And my question would be, who is the next choir director? Because we desperately need one. And I'm wondering, you know, picking up on your comment, Carlos, is it the individual citizenry that, you know, created the changes that Marilyn was speaking to? Is that the next choir director, JC?
Tom, that is the question for eternity, right? It is the heaviest question on my heart. As much as I want to praise the John Lewises for running for office, I think that is one of the boldest and scariest things to do in life. What I've learned in my years in politics is that the people who normally want to run for office, you don't want in office, right? And the people who you want to run, that like Carlos, who have all these years of business experience and acumen, and you're like, hey man, you might be a good leader and we can hold you accountable. Carlos probably doesn't want to run, right? And so that's the conundrum we find ourselves in American politics today. And truthfully, we need thousands of choir directors. As you just quoted from the Dalai Lama, it's not one guy. This isn't a Jesus savior complex where one guy saves everybody. I need a choir director in East Oakland, East St. Louis, Detroit, Chicago, all parts of Texas, because that's his own country, right? We need choir directors standing up, but we're singing the same song. The song is for peace. The song is to reinstitute joy. The song is to make sure that our children can outlive these nuclear weapons, right? And so with the song in our hearts that's in unison, now we can lead these communities. And to me, I mean, that's what Martin Luther King was doing in his greatest organization structure, right? He, in one way, you can say Martin Luther King was an underground rapper for the 50s and 60s, going town to town, singing the same song, the same verses, repeating the same speeches, making sure everybody was in one mindset, black, white, rich, poor. This is how we want America to move forward for humanity. And so I say that equally with fear in my own heart about Oakland, California, right? We have a recall election coming up for mayor, and I've been in heavy prayer, heavy conversation with my counselors and leaders around me on, do I jump in this? Do I literally jump into the fire where I'm potentially going to be burned at the cross to try to give an example of how to lead in a right way, how to bring our young people into the forefront, right? I think about, if you're 29 years old today, you've never voted for Obama. You didn't vote in 2008 or 2012. You were 17 years old. How do we motivate them? Because those are the same young people that were hitting the streets and creating a lot of the mayhem because they didn't have direction. So we need to touch them, but we have to bring to them the wisdom from the elders and the ancestors. It's a struggle and it's hard because it's like, when you think, do you step up and end up getting taken out? Or do you step up and is the choir going to step up with you in song? And so this is my battle I'm dealing with internally as I decide if I'm going to step up or not. But this has been a great, great opportunity to share with you guys and to learn from you all today about, again, those actions that need to be taken. Because as I'm going to quote my mom one more time, I myself can't be so heavenly minded that I'm no earthly good. There's something that I have to do too on this planet to make a difference. And so I'm debating it. I'm struggling with it. Marilyn, maybe next time I see you, we'll hug and cry and we'll talk about it. But yeah, if I do run for mayor, I'll let you all know, and I'll need your support, because this is not a Dalai Lama situation. This is a community Lama situation. And I think I just made up the phrase community
I
Lama.
like that.
You all have a beautiful day.
Carlos.
Yes, I have a metaphor. I love metaphors. They are powerful. And the metaphor is, think of a rowing boat, an Olympic rowing boat, especially the one that has one leader and the rowers working in coordination with the calling of the leader. And that's a beautiful design boat. And my question is, for what kind of waters is this boat designed? And for what kind of direction? And it's a straight line, and it's still water. And if water is our context nowadays, it's not steady. We're in rough waters, we're in wide waters. We need a different boat. We need a different boat and a different kind of leadership. And coming back to your question, Tom, about the choir leader, I think this is time for a much more collaborative leadership, distributed leadership, with coordination, of course, but we really need to tap on collective intelligence, and I would say collective wisdom. There is no way, as JC was saying, that one individual can hold the complexity of the world. It's impossible. We need to think about it. But we are so tied with tradition that we continue rowing in the same boat in wide waters. We might sink if we don't reconfigure the boat and reconfigure the way we interact with each other. We need to understand that. So government need to be collaborative across sectors. We need to create new policies with a more flexible understanding of the world. So I believe that metaphor that has been with me for many years is just a calling of a different kind of leadership that we need to foster and to bring forward, because the world is needing that we go through these wide waters successfully and enjoy the ride, instead of being with panic in the ride. Enjoy the ride, the adrenaline of the ride, and be together and be sustaining each other in this ride. This is the world we live in, and I think it's wonderful. And as one friend of mine in Santos, Brazil said, let's change the world dancing. And let's change our worlds dancing. So let's enjoy life as long as we're alive, and enjoy with a sense of responsibility and a sense of commitment to a larger good. I think this is the time for leaders that we have inside to come forward and to move from a sense of victim of the world to be a protagonist of the world. That transition, I think, is necessary. And what I said the other day to some friends is, I don't know what to do about Mexico, but I know what I will not do. I will not go in despair. I will not go in depression. I will ask myself every day, what is the best thing I can do today for a better Mexico? That's a question for us every day. And as citizens, we can be very powerful. Actually, citizens have the power to change governments, to change the structures,
Yes.
institutions, and we need to do that with consciousness. So again, from our ego to our higher self, and act from that, and have a life-centered attitude. Life is at the center. Coming back just because as the peace wheel indicates, there are many domains in our life that need to be taken care of, and we really need to understand that where we are living now, and what is the calling of today's world to each one of us. And I think is of peace, is of collaboration, is of solidarity, because we all need each other to live better. We all need each other. And yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. And my closing remarks would just, for me, a couple of things that were standing out about we can't solve the problems from the consciousness that created. I am someone who has for 40 years been teaching Olympian thinking, which is a different perspective than perhaps many people have. But part of it has to do with you have to be clear about the goal. So I want to pull again from some of the comments that one of my favorite people that I draw inspiration from said it very simply in terms of what I call a simple definition of peace. And Dr. King said, and I love the way he started this quote, he said, "I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their body, education and culture for their mind, freedom and dignity for their spirit." And today we've been talking about the game plan for peace being one lens, the 8 sectors of the peace wheel. And what do we know about good governance, and what can we do to speed shift to good governance? My particular best framework I have is mature democracy, as I shared with you, defined as fully informed participatory democracy. So the thing that I could see to do is to get Gene Sharp's book translated for the American public and turned into a graphic novel, so that we can all easily understand how we shift from the broken system that we're operating under to a system that works for 7 generations. And also, I invite my neighbors right before the election all the time to bring something that they care about and explain it to us so we can be fully informed and participating in this democracy. So thank you all, and thank you, Tom, and thank you, Jim.
Yeah, and with that, I'd like to invite Jim back into the conversation, and I'm sorry we lost JC.
I think he went off to run for mayor. It would be great to have a guy like JC as mayor of Oakland, wouldn't it, Maryland?
He's amazing.
Yeah, he's a real dynamo.
And he's the whole package.
Yeah, he's the whole package.
Yes.
Good. You know, I was thinking of some things I wanted to bring in, but then Kim Kerrigan put in a very interesting question about how do we transcend the axiom that absolute power corrupts absolutely. I would love to have your comment on that, Carlos, as someone who obviously deeply considers these matters. That there's something about the nature of power that is corrupting, like the ring in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I'd love to have all 3 of you comment. Oh, there's JC again. JC, I would just wanted to bring in a question that Kim Kerrigan is putting in the chat of how do you understand the axiom that absolute power corrupts absolutely, that there's something about the nature of power itself that is corrupting. What would be your comments, just starting with Carlos?
Thank you. Yes, that's a very, very common thought nowadays in my country, because now we're seeing a government that has absolute power in this regard, and we're scared. We are really looking to other countries like Venezuela and ask ourselves, gee, what are we moving into at this time? Yes, I believe that that term is precise in the sense that the accumulation of power as we know it could be a source of really acts that have unintended consequences, very negative. However, if this concentration of power is used properly, wow, then there could be tremendous possibility, because it will depend on the why. What for do you want power? That's the question I would raise. If I want power, my question is, what for? What purpose is it serving to have that power? And just a comment, and I will finish my idea, is that what if power, we can think of power in two ways. One is the real physical power that I have to make a decision or to press a button that will send missiles to other country. That's one kind of power. But the other is our inner power. The inner power, the potential that we have, the possibilities that we can create through ourselves. So in terms of governance, I agree that concentration of power without balancing the power and having different institutions taking care of the system is so necessary, and we need to. That is why democracy has worked for so many years, and we're in such desperate need for that. However, power would be used depending on the nature and the level of consciousness of who has it. So it's both a course that some people will have tremendous power to influence the world or to destroy the world, but some great leaders with power can do wonders, and we're living those two worlds at the same time.
You know, that's a really good point, and it's going to be very interesting to see in Mexico that at the moment of sort of supreme pre-power, it's a woman who is taking the helm, and whether as a woman she'll have the depth of a moral clarity not to succumb to the corruption of power. It'll be very interesting to watch the dynamic that happens inside her psyche. She's clearly a technocrat, but still very motivated, I think, ethically to do the good.
You're absolutely right, Jim. And we're just about 10 days from having her in power.
Oh, wow, I hadn't taken that in. Wow, this is going to be. Maybe you could come back in on Humanity Rising toward the end of the year, Carlos, to give us a report.
I would love to, because what you said, Jim, and I'm such a fan of scenario planning, is that one of the scenarios is that she makes a shift, and that she really understands the system where we live in, and that she, from her itself could do wonders for Mexico as the first woman president. I really cross my fingers that she has a leap of consciousness. And,
well, you know, I mean, in the United States, we're at the verge of the same kind of dynamic. We know what Trump's going to do.
That's true.
We know that the tyrant waits in the heart of Trump. Kamala Harris feels a much more elegant, mature spirit. And so one wonders when she goes into the Oval Office, if that's the way the history works out, whether her personal morality will be sufficient to withstand the institutional pressures and inevitable corruption of the most powerful office in the world. So it's interesting parallels between the United States and Mexico being played out right now. Very interesting.
It's so close, Jim.
Cool. JC, what would you say about Kim Kerrigan's notion about absolute power corrupting absolutely and the nature of power toward a good end?
Yes, no, I tend to agree. And as I remember the quote, it was like power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So even a little bit of power can corrupt the soul. But it's not something we can avoid, right? You don't cut your lawnmower, you don't cut your grass with scissors instead of a lawnmower because you're afraid of the power of the lawnmower, right? That it could cut your hand off, but we have to work smart. My grandfather would say you have to be smarter than the object you're working with. And when I think about the accountability piece, I think that's the best way to check power, whether we're doing it with AI, our computers, our heavy machinery, right? There's a way to turn it on, turn it off, right? Somehow when we get into presidents and government leaderships, there's not a real way to turn them off.
Yeah, there's no off button.
yeah, once they're on, their internet's going forever, right? And it gets stronger and stronger. And so I think part of that is the circle around the person matters, right? I had a friend, a really good friend of mine, Charles Booker. He ran against Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul in the state of Kentucky for Senate a few years back. And somewhere along the campaign, it was encouraging him to put a noose around his neck for a campaign commercial to explain how the struggles that people were going through in Kentucky. I said, was there nobody around you to tell you that was a stupid idea? Right? Like, you made everybody feel uncomfortable, black, white, Democrat, or Republican, to watch you have a noose around your neck. Somebody should have said, bro, this is not okay. And I'm curious about how power develops. And once you get to the highest level, is there nobody around that can check that person? Right? And I think that's where we find children in cages, right? That's where we find children going to bed hungry. 60% of some of our inner city kids go to bed hungry every single night.
Good point.
Right? We're not using our power in a conversation. And I think, just like I was saying earlier, I have a council of elders around me that I talk to and I lean on, and they kind of Mike Tyson me at different points, right? They have to punch me in the face, say, hey, JC, rethink yourself. Then I have to go home and meditate and reflect and rethink myself. And I wonder what our leaders, do they have that? Or do we kind of, because of our Jesus, Dalai Lama kind of subconscious theory, once we release them in power, according to our social contract, we say, it's your job, save the world, I'm going to go bold. And I think that's the conversation, right? Like, we have to, I don't want a mayor or governor or president that cannot be talked to, that cannot have a cup of coffee and be engaged with in a real way for real dialogue, in a way that it's not, I'm counseling you because I disagree with you. No, I really want to dialogue with you, and I want to create a new thought. Like when two plants come together and they create a new leaf, I want to create a new thought. And I think without those new thoughts in that conversation, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I don't think there's a way we can avoid those physics, right? Because if you're by yourself with power unchecked, things are going to do what they do. AI, I think, is a good example of that.
Good points. Thank you so much. Marilyn, what would you say on this matter? And then Tom.
Yeah, I've got two areas of reflection. One is the system that brings this individual or group to power, and the difference between a system that is driven by the money that comes from corporations that are profit driven. Yes, absolutely. I would say 100% I agree. But I also know that there are systems that are publicly funded in terms of governance. And it has a significant moderating impact on the ability of the individuals who are making decisions to make decisions from a place that might be more human and humanity and 7 generations centered. So number one, I think paying attention to what the system is. And unfortunately, I've been around enough people who surely felt like me. They ran for office in different organizations for the right reasons. And boy, as I watched them go up the ladder, small, decisions that they made that weren't that bad, they just escalated. So I really do agree and believe strongly that the system that we're in makes a difference, and that we can create a system. And that having systems for governance that are publicly funded have the ability to certainly make a difference and moderate that. But the other thing that I've been following for over 40 years is an organization called Transparency International. And I have just watched the level of transparency. We see who you are. We know what you're doing. And we have very highly increased ability now to shine the light on what you're doing. At the same time, I have watched rise the system of accountability. So for me, we are at a point now where the degree to which we can see who you are and we know what you're doing, and we're still creeping up there in our ability to hold you accountable. But, to me, in terms of, your quote and your question is, I do believe that transparency and accountability, and because it's not one leader anymore, it's people power, and that we can see who you are, we know what you're doing. Mature democracy says, fully informed, participatory. I believe in the goodness of people.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Those are two absolutely essential checks on power. Absolutely. Absolutely. Checks and balances, boy. Tom, what would you say?
I'm going to take it in a completely different direction. I'm going to start with the work of the relational therapist, Terence Real. And Terence talks about we as human beings, particularly adults, are walking around as our wounded child, our adaptive child, and our wise elder. And more often than not, our adaptive child is running our life, is making those decisions. And it's that adaptive child that can be corrupted by power. And when we look at the ego, oftentimes people think of the ego and they only think of the shadow side of ego, but we've got a light side of the ego and a shadow side of the ego. And the shadow side of the ego isn't that, that dark part of humanity as I relate to it. It's that part of the ego that is that wounded child, that adaptive child is trying to make sense of the world. And so, looking at the work of Gabor Mate and so many others that are focused on trauma and healing trauma, and each of us healing our personal trauma allows us to get beyond that corruption of power, that wrestles with and can reconcile that question that Carlos raised around what do I want that power for? And if it's that wise adult that's answering that question as opposed to our adaptive child or our wounded child, then we can answer that question in a very appropriate way. So that would be my response to Kim's question. I appreciate her bringing that into the conversation today, because it gets at the heart of the importance and the need for governance and for law and for security. Because at any given time, any one of us can lose our way, and we need those guardrails. We need that governance that ensures that our adaptive child isn't making the wrong decisions for the wrong reasons.
We could just pause there, because I think, Tom, you're making an absolutely profound point about the nature and exercise of power. When you were speaking, I was thinking of Nelson Mandela I was thinking of Mikhail Gorbachev. These were both people who came up through the most tortured systems, apartheid and, totalitarian Bolshevism. And yet they had an elegance of spirit. They were in touch with their wise elder. And, just think of Nelson Mandela, who the whole world would have understood had he used his power for vengeance.
Mm.
And instead, it was for forgiveness and reconciliation.
Mm.
And Gorbachev coming up and he could have taken on the US and built more weapons, and everybody would have understood that because that was the nature of the arms race. And he didn't. He surrendered Eastern Europe. He engaged in the diplomacy to try to create what he called a global ethical civilization.
Mm.
And so, I think this is a powerful statement about the nature of governance too, that people matter, and our own personal disposition of being really matters. So as we arrive to power, as they say that circumstances don't so much make a person as reveal a person. And that's what you were alluding to, Marilyn, with your friends who got into power, but they hadn't done the personal work that Tom's talking about. And so the more they accumulated power, the more they revealed their wounded child. So this is really brilliant conversation. Thank you all so much. Very, very, very good. Tom, why don't you tee us up for tomorrow, and then we'll bring the session to a close.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And JC and Carlos and Marilyn, thank you. What a brilliant time together today. It was certainly what Marilyn and I had hoped we would have. This is the kind of discussion we were hoping for to help our audience understand the role of governance, law, and security as a critical component of world peace. So thank you. Tomorrow we're gonna shift and we're gonna focus on the next piece or component of the peace wheel, which is focused on education and the role that education plays in ensuring that we can have a peaceful coexistence.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Marilyn, Carlos, JC. This has been a splendid, very deep and nuanced conversation today. You're all welcome to the after chat if you would like to join them for a more informal conversation. You'll see the link in the chat box. You also receive the link in your Zoom reminder for today. And then tomorrow we'll convene our third of 10 sessions on really it's the wheel of peace and how in each sector of society we can manifest the peace that's already there in a way that inspires all of us to shine light on the darkness. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.
Thank you.